Welcome to these stories from the field. My name is Saqib Ghani.
I'm Rodrigo Gazza and I, your co-host of Stories from the Field. And I'm happy to introduce our first guest, Brian. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Brian Tebin. I'm an enterprise architect with Corning Incorporated.
Brian, we're really excited about our first episode together. Of course, we're going to talk about enterprise architecture, but I think that we have to address the elephant in the room, right? We have to talk about COVID-19, 2020, right? How it all impacted your priorities, how it impacted your projects, right? Reacting to remote work and still, putting all these transformation projects together. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, it's such an unfortunate event that's occurring, and it doesn't seem like it's getting much better, to be honest. When we look at what we were doing, and we actually had a pretty laid out plan for the entire year, and obviously COVID-19 was unexpected in what we were, in what we had to do and what we had to face. Traditionally, from our side of the, from a cultural perspective and the way we traditionally work, we're pretty heavily in office and very oriented toward meetings in person. So this was quite a shift from us from a prioritization perspective, but also as a how we work perspective. So we definitely had to make some rapid changes in terms of what project we were focused on. We were going through an entire transformation around, we're really looking at an entire digital transformation. And so this really kind of changed some of the focus and prioritization in terms of those efforts that we were currently undertaking. Much more focused to enabling remote work, enabling and training employees to be able to be effective and work remotely. And so we had a significant focus, early on. It was interesting because, I would think a lot of companies that might be listening to this, right, probably had the same kind of challenge. Do we tackle some new technologies to enable remote work, or do we continue with kind of the tried and true and trusted technologies? And there's always that debate, right? Is this a chance to really, it's actually interesting because you can look at COVID-19 almost as a disrupting force that almost encourages kind of some digital transformation, especially when it comes from a culture perspective. But we did take a fairly traditional approach, expanded our VPN style technologies in terms of how we were addressing, remote work. We obviously had some, those capabilities, but to do it at scale. And so we took a very traditional approach. Prioritization was there. And that was really where, we focused at. We did have a number of technologies that were already in place for web conferencing and things like that, that were that we just simply ensured everybody was comfortable with. We expanded our training capabilities. And so that was really how we addressed it. Now, the impact of that was a lot of our current, priorities that we did have obviously slipped, right? We had really a 3-month period there where we were pretty heavily focused on those type of activities and ensuring success of our remote workforce. And so that obviously, caused some delays in some of our other activities.
Perfect. Yeah, it's like you said, Brian, nobody planned for that. And an exercise of prioritization is exactly what you described. Some things are going to have to wait. And I really want to continue touching on that point of those priorities and transformation. But I think that Saqib has a point here to make as well.
Yeah, no, you had a great story out there, Brian. What is happening is that you had your IT initiatives already, in the plan for the year. Now, how are you guys you managing your rollout of IT initiatives mapping to the business, right? Business outcomes, which is business value mapping, right? So how is that happening, keeping in view now you had to tweak a lot of your priorities? How are you managing holistically all of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have a lot of implications from the shift of the priorities. So one of the things that you got to look at is, what were those priorities originally? Mm-hmm. Which ones are still, obviously necessary for that, kind of the foundational transformation that we were planning long term. We actually, obviously we had a lot of changes in from a business perspective as well. So as you're looking at the business prioritization changes, I think you've seen, hopefully, some folks have seen in the news, there's been a lot of focus around our vials, right, for the creation of vaccines. And so you think about that shifting of the priorities into something like that and addressing that need for, for obviously the COVID-19 vaccines that are being produced, you start to look at those priorities and which priorities make the most sense to enable what we need to do to address, that business demand, where in some other cases there might be lessening demand from other business projects. And the other thing that's really interesting, let's talk about Gaza, when you look at, or at least when we looked at this, was, as there was some contraction in terms of business priorities, we look at it from an IT perspective as there's an opportunity to use this time to get done a lot of the work that we needed to do from a foundational perspective, improving the network, right? Looking at some of our cloud initiatives, understanding our application portfolios and ways to, to start to rationalize those more effectively. And so this is, I often think about this almost like a sine curve, right? When you have business demand, a lot of times IT needs to be handling the demand of growth in business, but when you have some kind of downturns, those are perfect opportunities, right, for IT to do some of the foundational type work, the cleaning, those activities. And that really, we definitely looked at it from that perspective.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think that's what keeps us going. How fast can we tweak and give back to business that speed they have been looking at? I think that's something we wanted to learn from you and, from your experience. The other point is, with this, the question comes in while you had to tweak and do so many change in the priorities. I wanted to take from you a process of, you gave an example of onboarding certain set of application for COVID, and explain a quick snapshot of a request coming in. Hey, we have a new application which we want to onboard, and now we know that the existence of there was a focus, hey, we need to go to the public cloud was everybody's priority. There's a priority for, now we want to have a multi-cloud. There's a priority now everybody is talking about getting workloads back to on-prem. But you would have a process. I really want to give listeners a process which, from your experience, they follow on onboarding an application, if you may spend some time on that.
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about, let's say I'll assume we already have chosen an application. Obviously, from a foundational perspective, got to go through the security, right? The core security aspects, ensuring, that the application does pass from that perspective. So assuming that, things are good and, from that perspective of security, we then start to look at the workload itself, right? What is the application? Is it SaaS-based? Is it something that we need to, host from an on-prem perspective? You almost kind of think of it in terms of, as we're looking at kind of our multi-cloud initiatives, right? We really have developed and continue to kind of develop an approach of how we onboard these applications. And it's driven from a traditional 6R analysis type approach, right? Is this something that where do we want to host it? What's that specific workload, required? Is it better to have that application on-prem? Is there needs from, you can almost think about it from a data perspective, right? If in our case, from a manufacturing environment, if the application is addressing some some manufacturing needs, there may be need to keep some of that data closer to those operations, right? Where they can't necessarily be sent out to the cloud, either from a security perspective or even from, just a volume, a processing. And so you do need to assess, the various workloads. And so we do look at it in terms of what is that doing? What's the conditions around the data? And where is really the opportune, location to host that data? Is it in one of our, data centers, our core data centers? Or is it out in, a hosted facility, or even in a native cloud provider, for example? Is that the most effective location for it? And so, there is a process from that perspective. But then on top of that, we do have what we call our Architecture Innovation Council. Some people may kind of think of it as an ARB, and we don't really like the Architecture Review Board. There's some people will view it as a little bit more stringent, more rigid, kind of a strong governance review process. And we don't like to think of it that way, right? We want to really think about enabling innovation, right? How is enterprise architecture bringing people together, looking at applications? There's this need from a business perspective. There's a specific outcome that's desired. And how do we ideate and bring some of that innovative thinking out for others to really see? And so it's a lot more collaborative in terms of that perspective. of really surfacing this, the information. Now, there's an essence of governance that obviously happens over top of it from that perspective. And so, there is all the decisioning process in terms of, how we host and where we want to, handle the applications.
Yeah,
hopefully that kind of gives you some context.
No, perfect. I know you brought a lot of context on the application rationalization need, but let me go back to one of the comments you made first. I found it very interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in COVID-19 situations, we are seeing the term cloud, right, being associated, right, like, hey, this is the big move to the cloud, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I like that how you explained that it's also a moment for IT and enterprise architecture to do some exercise of optimization, right? Because while things may be moving in, faster in one direction, things are also slowing down on some others, and that gives room for, the organization to revisit the layout and the landing zones that we may have available. So tell us a little more about, what you're seeing, and as an enterprise architect, where do you think that the trends are going to go in that side?
Yeah, I think to your point, Gazza, right? This really is it's an interesting opportunity. COVID-19 has really changed the way businesses look at their applications, right? How they're hosting. The other thing that I found really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of articles out there, and maybe I'll touch on this particular example because I found this one to be extremely intriguing, and it really impacted us as well from being an international company, right, and having sites throughout the world. I see a lot of articles around supply chain changes, right, and the impacts, from that perspective of basically making sure in the future as we go forward, right, you have some diverse capabilities from a supply chain perspective, and same thing from an application view, right. We need to be able to assure that you're able to service, right, and move and address these changing type demands, right. When things were getting, obviously, Wuhan in China and the expansion of the virus in Asia at that point in time, we were immediately addressing needs there, but we were already starting to think about, okay, wait a minute, this is going to, probably come across, right? It's going to come through, and we had to start thinking about the different regions that we have business in and how we, some of the implications and some of the things we might need to change. Now, I think this is, I do believe this is transformational in terms of, a lot of companies, have had to rethink how they work, how they operate. This could happen at any point in the future, obviously, and we obviously hope it doesn't, and we hope we can get through this fairly quickly. But, I think it does transform the way companies will continue to address this need, and I think it does really put more focus on cloud type environments that give you more flexibility to be able to either move workloads around as you need. Applications that are hosted, can be moved, where you need them. It's definitely, I think it's definitely a catalyst from that perspective. But, you can't ignore the fact that there's always going to be certain type of use cases. There's certain type of systems that must be really kind of on a traditional, I'll say, on-premise type approach. Now, even from an on-premise perspective, a lot of people can just think about their data centers and their on-premise environments just as a different cloud location, so to speak, right? So a lot of it's about becoming, and thinking about how to create foundations that allow you to move, workloads effectively, either, from cloud providers or into your own personal, on-premise type environment. So I definitely do think this is transforming the way people work. I think it's opened a lot of, perspectives in terms of the ability to actually, do work remotely. But, there obviously are businesses that are just tremendously impacted and can't, traditionally operate that way. Even us from a manufacturing perspective, right? We still have manufacturing floors that need people and need people there to operate and run those processes. So, yeah, there's two pieces to that, but it's definitely transformational from an IT perspective and showing, what has been and what is possible. I guess, guys, one other thing I'll kind of throw out there is even from an education perspective, right? It was really fascinating for me. And it continues to be when you look at how schools are operating, right? And using technology, to be able to remotely train, to be able to do assignments, to use some of the technologies like that are out there. Whether you're looking at some of the Microsoft platforms in like Teams, for example, right, and the ability to, give assignments and work and collaborate on some of the work that's out there. And so, same thing from a business perspective, right? You can collaborate and work on these type of platforms that are out there. So, I think it's definitely transformational from that perspective.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think we have an opportunity.
Sorry, I was going to say, you can almost think about it as it's really a fundamental digital culture change, right? That's occurring.
No, perfect. I was going to talk about that. We are really for productivity for any organization.
Yeah, it really is the catalyst. There's no doubt, Gazza. Yep.
Absolutely. Going back to where we started, enterprise architecture, and Brian, this keeps on, this is one of the thoughts which we always have. Where does enterprise architecture sit within, what's from your experience, share your thoughts on one side as an enterprise architecture, you have operations, you have business. How do you basically holistically bring all it together? And the need of enterprise architecture, looking from the business perspective and gelling all of it together. I think that's the need. And I want definitely listeners to take that before we move on, right? So
Sure.
Your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's one of the challenges that's being faced in the industry, especially over the last few years, right? As the pace of change has increased just ever dramatically, and new technologies coming out, new approaches. There's been a lot of discussion around enterprise architecture, right, and where it fits in organizations. I've seen organizations that don't have enterprise architecture. I've seen organizations that have very strong and fairly large enterprise architecture organizations. So there's a wide gambit. For me personally, I think enterprise architecture is, it's really got to be a catalyst for being, really being close to the business and being that catalyst to help bring those business needs into IT, right? So I think if you think about it on a spectrum, I would say EA should be partnering very close with the business, understanding what the business needs are, understanding what the direction is, what they're trying to achieve. Translate that into and help the business understand, okay, this is how IT can help, right, facilitate and enable what you're trying to achieve, especially in today's world, right? When you think about digital innovation and all of the change that's happening, it's just really fundamental to have those enterprise architecture roles, linking between business and really the traditional IT organizations that you talked about, like from an operations perspective, right? You really have to, bring that linkages. Now, I also do, strongly believe that enterprise architecture really helps provide some governance, right? It's very easy when you think about, the events that we've just been through for an organization all of a sudden to be, kind of challenged with, wait a minute, I have to figure out how to work from home. And there's, 20 people bringing 20 different approaches to how that can be done, right? And so enterprise architecture really can help facilitate those conversations. Think about how you address those needs from an enterprise scale, right, across the entire business, and not just pockets, right, that are asking for that. And so you really kind of bring some of that governance to help from an operational perspective.
Absolutely, and I think what we will definitely want to have more from you on how you're doing, bringing in the network, bringing in the security, cybersecurity, DevSecOps, all that definitely falls under the umbrella of getting all of this together. And we'll definitely want to hear more in the coming episode. We definitely need to lean on getting some more in there, because I do feel that getting all of this together is very, very key for our listeners. It's just not about technology. It's about how do you truly bring everything integrated together and give it back to the, your organization holistically.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that is definitely key. Any other thoughts, which before we close on Gazza, any thoughts from you on the conversation we were having?
I just want to say thanks, Brian, for joining us. It's been a short and very interesting conversation that will definitely continue. And I look forward to the next chapters.
Yeah, I really want to thank you guys both. This was very interesting, and yeah, definitely looking for the next one. I think this will be very interesting as we keep going forward.
For sure, Brian. We look forward to the next one as well, because there are a lot of questions for our listeners there, which we need to navigate as well. I appreciate, keep listening, keep asking questions. Thank you very much.